Hello, and thank you for coming to view session 3 of the Sacred Music Seminar. After the seminar, I realized that there were several points I intended to cover but did not, or at least not with the intended thoroughness. This is partly because my notes were not well organized, and partly because I was just a little bit outside of my comfort zone with a more interactive format. At any rate, I have prepared a summary of the session, which I hope clearly lays out the material I intended to cover. If you want to skip to that, you'll find a link in the video description below which takes you right to that point. Thanks, and I hope you appreciate the video. All right, we'll get started. Welcome to session 3 of 4. If you missed 1 or 2, I have the handouts from those on the table over there, as well as the one from today. And as of this morning, well, let's see. Session 1 is posted on the parish website now on the music page. Session 2, I've just finished processing the video, and that should be up tomorrow. So one thing, if you missed 2, or if you came to number 2 last week and you didn't get it, I have the readings that I gave you to help spark discussion for today. Everybody who was here last week, do you have it? Okay. Did I give you this?
I picked one up from you.
Okay, that's right. Good. Okay. Okay, just kind of a recap of where we've come so far. What we've done so far is we covered in the first session a general introduction to the history of the liturgy and the history of sacred music. We talked a lot about how sacred music as such in the Christian tradition came about, arising out of the text. And mostly we spent a lot of time on the history stuff, right? And last week we kind of zoned in on a few of those topics in more detail. We went through a sort of oral history of the development of polyphony, so how we got from music of just one line, singing one voice, to music with multiple parts. We talked about, instruments in the Catholic liturgy. Basically, we went up to the Baroque with that, and then we talked about music that arose out of the Protestant Reformation. And what else did we do? We talked about hymns, right? We talked about the special place of hymns in the Catholic tradition, how they were mostly developed in the office, and we talked about how they're strophic, and you can mix and match texts and tunes with hymns, and we'll have more on hymns next week. But did I pretty much cover everything we've done so far? So it's been a lot of history, I think, and a little bit of music theory as well. So today is going to be completely different. So you see, I don't have my PowerPoint up today because I'm just going to be using the whiteboard. I'm not sure exactly how this all is going to go. It will depend a lot on you. So I'm relying on you to participate and give your input. For the most part, there aren't really wrong answers. So when I ask you what you think of something or what you think something is, that's all I mean. I'm not asking you for a rigorous scientific or philosophical definition. But we're going to be looking at topics relating to theology and philosophy around music and the experience of music in liturgy, and as well as beauty. So there's a lot to cover there. I don't know, I have kind of a format, but it may go out the window as we go along. So we'll just start. First, this whole thing is about sacred music. So what is, in the first session we talked about sacred, right? So what's the sacred part?
Set apart.
Sacred, right, sacred is holy, which means set apart, right? It's set apart from, but what about the music part? What is this thing we call music?
Some text.
Okay,
Are we being really broad?
I'm being really broad. What is music?
Organized sound.
Organized sound. All right, I've heard that one before. How is it organized?
It's not noise.
All right, not,
It's not environmental noise.
okay. Not environmental.
Yeah, sorry. There's more to that, but
Okay, what else? What is music?
heard it referred to as an evolutionary
Expression of
parasite.
thoughts,
Celebration of
Expression of
thoughts.
thought. Okay, let's say this. Expression. Ethel, you said thoughts, feelings, right? What else?
Art.
Art. Art. That's another question. What is
Oh,
No.
Okay, just all kinds of associations. Again, not a rigorous definition. What makes music music? I mean, we know it when we hear it, right? I mean, that if you talk for a while about music, you might end up just being frustrated and saying, well, I know it when I hear it. But that would be different for different people, right? So, some people might hear a hip hop track and say, "Oh, that's not music. That's not music." Is hip hop music? Is hip hop? It is.
music,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Well, what makes it music?
The rhythms. It has a
Rhythms.
has a rhythm and beat.
Okay. It has.
It expresses thoughts and feelings.
Okay. Let's take a look at this. Put my H and my M together. Rhythm.
There's an eraser.
Beat. Yeah, it's in my other hand, as a matter of fact.
That was
It was a long distance up there. So, okay, this is something. Well, what about chant? Does chant have a rhythm?
Yes.
Poetic.
A poetic rhythm. Okay. So, how is its rhythm different than the rhythm of this?
It's
very
free
fluid.
flowing.
It's an energy difference.
Okay.
It's more
All right.
fluid than.
Fluid.
All right. So what then sets this apart from other free communication, like speech?
Melody.
Melody. Okay. So what is a melody?
Organized high and low sounds.
Okay.
And I believe that melody and rhythm they exist one within that melody cannot exist without rhythm. So
That melody cannot exist without rhythm. Okay, interesting. So I think you're probably right there. So melody, rhythm, these are some central things, but you could have, if you have just a drum beat, is that music?
Yes.
Okay, so you can have just rhythm, but can you, let's take a look at this. Can you have a melody without rhythm?
no, because it's duration. There has to be some sort of duration.
There has to be some
Time.
kind of connection between different notes. Of course, saying what is a pitch is another question, because when I'm speaking, my vocal inflection has a kind of organization and rhythm to it, but it doesn't follow. It doesn't follow the notes on the scale per se. Speaking generally without getting too nitty gritty. Yes.
I again plead musical ignorance, but it seems to me that your question, what is music, has devolved here. Talking about component parts and things which fit within it, don't seem to be defining music.
Well, that's the thing is I wanted to take a look at all of these characteristics and say what we're talking about sacred music and what makes it distinct. What is the difference? What is the specific difference that makes music different than speech, than a drum beat, than other expressions of thoughts or feelings?
A scale, or some sort of scale.
Okay, some sort of, so, okay, then what is a scale?
like the organization of the pitches.
That's right, a kind of organization of the pitches, which is the frequency of the sound, right? And where does that organization come from? Math.
Or,
Yes.
Yeah,
That's
there's
physics.
a connection.
Okay.
Oh no, capital letters.
Yes.
Oh, I thought-
There's a good reason for that, because the ancients considered music to be a subset of mathematics. Up into the Middle Ages, that's what it was considered. It was considered a subset of mathematics. And it is based on the very structure of reality, of physics, of physical reality. So I think that we're onto something when we say that music being based in this reality, this kind of unchanging reality. There's some element of it that is based in an unchanging reality, okay? Right? That we can sort of grasp in certain ways conceptually, but you can't grab a math. You can write down a melody, you can sing a melody, you can describe things, but it's just the way things are in a way. And that what Sarah was saying, that you can't really have a melody without having some sort of rhythm. So you can have pitches that may have some mathematical relationship to each other, but if there isn't some kind of temporal glue holding them together, which would be the rhythm, whether you're talking about strictly time or a more natural speech rhythm, which doesn't follow a specific time interval. I don't know. Any other thoughts? This is not a hugely significant part of the presentation, but I just want you to get you thinking. You know, there's about what music really means, and
Doesn't it kind of touch your soul? Some kind of soulfulness about music.
Okay.
Even
All right.
hip hop, I'm sure
Let's-
some people means something to them deeply.
Let's take that next. All right. So what I want to do now is go right where Deborah is going and say, what is the experience? What is the experience of music? What does that involve? What can it involve?
Listening.
Happiness,
Okay.
Anything about life.
celebration.
All right, let's say happiness, celebration. So we've got kind of an emotional theme here, right? All right.
Emotions,
Let's see. There we go. Emotional. All right. So what else? You can other things in emotional. We have some positive emotions here. Are there any?
Sadness.
Okay.
sadness.
Frustration.
Yes.
Irritation.
All right. Yep. Great. Okay. What else? What else about the experience of music?
It's collaborative.
Okay, so,
Or can
okay, it can be.
practice.
So why is that good?
It brings people.
Or why is that significant, whether it's good or not? Why is it significant?
It becomes a social experience.
You just asked if it were part of the experience. And
Right.
It's inherently
Yeah.
part of the experience.
It's
Because
a
people make
social-
music for other people and they make
Yeah.
music together.
Right, right, okay. So, social, all right. So, what else?
It can motivate,
Motivate, okay.
like when you're talking about like a drum beat, just, for an army or, rallies, even a political rally, the type of music that's played, could get people revved up
Parades.
or something.
Military music parades.
Right.
It makes people feel this pride.
Right. So, so actually, it's not, now these categories are not gonna be mutually exclusive, but there's been some, talking and writing at the same time. Did I do that right? So some psychologists have really looked at this experience of music and its effect, what it just does to you. Sometimes without you feeling like you had a part in it. Now that's a different question. But, and they kind of seem to distill it into two. You have this stimulating part, right? I guess, motivate could go with that. And you have, what's the word they use? Like, soothing, okay? Soothing, or the other word I saw was tranquilizing. Okay, so you have these kind of general ways that it can affect you. It can be an up or a downer in one way or another. All right, but this is a psychological thing too, right? We need to share society, this kind of social interaction together. The creation of art, right, and beauty is good for us, right? We need that aesthetic expression and experience together. So
It can be propaganda, and it can be psychological
that's
control
right.
also.
That's right. P-R-O-P-A or O?
Propo,
Prop.
PA.
A.
A?
G-A-N.
Okay. So, well, that's a good question. Can you have good music and bad music?
It depends on the individuals.
Well, it could be manipulative.
Okay,
can
all right. So
manipulate.
it depends on a lot of factors. So you would say that music, the thing itself, is not good or bad.
No. Oscar
It's
Wilde
how
would
it's
say that.
used. It's
All
how
right.
it's used.
It's how it's used. Okay. So,
Can be used to stimulate passion to overcome reason.
yes, yes. And that would, as we're saying, that could depend highly on the disposition of the individual, right?
It could
So-
depend highly on the disposition of the person putting it out too.
Yes, both. Good. Okay. Emotional, psychological. What else?
Well,
Well,
there's the whole
a
music
big one.
therapy, like it can be therapeutic.
That's right. Therapy.
It could be healing.
Yeah. Ever since Aristotle, we've been talking about the word catharsis with relation to artistic expression. But there's a big one that I'm hoping to get
What is
over here that has to
intellectual?
do with what we're
Worship?
here for. All right.
Worship?
All right. So spiritual, right? Now, tell me about that. Music and spiritual.
Well, ideally, it should help raise your heart and mind to God.
Okay.
I would think that would be your ultimate goal.
Right? So, and what you gave me right there was kind of the definition of prayer, right? So,
Yeah.
a
They
prayer.
say, right, isn't singing praying twice or something like that?
Yes.
St. Augustine
That's right.
said.
That's right. There's a
Singing.
that's kind of
Double play.
a shortened form of something he said, right? Praying twice. Good. So let's take a look. If you take a look at your packet, So going off some of these things we have up here, I'm looking at number 2. I thought these things were interesting. So this first quote about music having the power of evil as well as for good, which we were talking about, right? And then the second one, I love this quote from Josef Pieper, a Catholic philosopher, about music. But what do you think about that? What do you think? Can music kind of lull you
Yeah.
Yeah,
into that
yeah.
where it's just like
It feels
everything's
good.
cool?
Yeah, but it doesn't really
Everything's cool.
say anything to you.
Right,
It's just like
right.
a hum in your ear.
That's right, almost a kind of hypnosis, right? So now let's take a look. If in here, your quote number 2 from St. Augustine. This is one of the earliest real introspective looks at the effect of music emotionally and spiritually. So Augustine is kind of caught between here. He says, on the one hand, he sees that souls are moved to ardor of devotion. But then he talks about the gratification of the flesh, and that it can become, that we can get caught up in that as well. And then he says, partway down, however, when I am moved not by the song, but by the things which are sung. When sung with fluent voice and music that is most appropriate, I acknowledge again the great benefit of this practice. So what he's talking about for Augustine, the value of music in worship seems to take this, seems to be about moving us into the nature of what is being sung, beyond the music itself, and taking that, if it does inspire us, and it does have those feelings associated with us, but to move beyond that to something else. So that's one approach to it. What do you think about that? Does that?
That's true.
Or is it? Or do you think maybe Augustine's wrong, and there's nothing wrong with just sitting in church and at Mass and just resting in how the enjoyment makes you feel and liking that?
It depends on the situation.
It depends. Okay.
Yeah. Maybe if you're in church just to experience, like I know I've been to when Mark Forrest has some of these, times where he sings
Okay.
for like a meditative session, and there I just go there just to let it wash over me so I can, meditate. But if I'm in church trying to pay attention to Mass, maybe I should be more focused on
All right.
the text of the Mass. I think that might depend.
Right. So maybe you might agree that at least in the context of Mass, the ideal experience of music would be one that allows you to enter into it, that enables you to enter into it, to do your part, so to speak, which we'll get to in a little bit.
But those sung parts are parts of the Mass. The only part I can think of would be the communion hymn after, while people are going up and down the aisle.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit. We'll get to more of that.
I mean, Augustine says in here he's being excessively severe.
He says that, yes,
he's disavowing.
so he talks about himself being excessively severe like that. So but the point is, it's hard to nail down, right? He can't quite figure out what's the best balance here. He doesn't want to, he sees some value in it, but he sees a danger in it too. So he doesn't want to throw it all together, but he says there's something about it that we need to keep that helps.
Well, there are two extremes, one of which he's willing to go with, and that is no music. And the other one is being there simply for the aesthetic effect,
Right.
as opposed to the spiritual effect. And It buys the spiritual effect with the music.
Right. That's right.
And even
That's
if
right.
even if it's incomplete, I mean, that's the excessive severity.
Right.
He recognizes that even if he isn't at the deepest point, he is still benefiting from it, but he wants to be at the deepest point.
Yes. Yeah. So, but it's all about that. To what degree is the music, is the art moving us beyond itself? So let's go a little bit into that. And now I want to talk about something Augustine mentions too, as a qualifier in there, which is the beauty of the music. So, what's this?
It's in the mind of the perceiver.
Okay, that's one idea. You hear this? The common one is in the eye of the beholder, right? So that's the music. It's the same thing, but that's the classic phrasing. All right. So, okay. What else? What are some other notions of beauty?
Gives glory to God.
Okay. How?
Lots of different ways. If you were to take a piece of music, the composer writing it could have written it in order to glorify God. Just writing the piece himself. I'm writing this, I'm dedicating this work for the glory of God. And then the other, hopefully what would happen is that the listeners would be, by listening to it or performing it, through the performance of it, would also be brought closer to God, or would have a means, an outlet, a tool to glorify God.
Okay, that's very good. So you've got you've got two approaches to that. You have it in the creation of the art, which is in the mind and the intention and the will of the person creating it. And you have the experience of it on the other end. Okay? Now, here's a question. Does the artist have to intend it to glorify God, for it to be beautiful?
No.
No.
Okay? So then you can have an experience of beauty that draws you closer to God, whether or not the artist intended that, right? Is that fair to say? But what would be ideal?
It
You
was.
have-
It seems like there's a step
Yeah.
that there has to be a
That's right.
performer, because creation of music can stand by
Yes.
itself.
Yes. You have in music, you have the composer and you have the performer. When I say artistic creation, I include both of these steps, right? Because both of them involve a process of creativity, right? So they're both together. Maybe the composer just composed it just because,
It's paid for it.
and that's right. And the performer is doing it for the glory of God, or maybe the other way around, or maybe neither, or maybe both. But we have these two poles, right? We have the creation of it, which could. So what makes it? This is what I really want to know. What makes it beautiful?
The words. The lyrics.
You just switched.
Yes. What? Before I
make
change gears.
So I was gonna make a distinction here. Again, I don't come at things, I'm here in ignorance with music. I come at things differently. Think of a painting or a work of literature. You can have a beautiful depiction of evil, an attractive, beautiful depiction of evil, but it is not beauty. Beautiful and beauty aren't synonyms, because you think of something beautiful, doesn't make it beauty, unless it conforms to the good and the true, it's not beauty. I'm arguing for, I guess, an objective standard more than the older
all right.
standard.
Let's, you're actually kind of going in the direction I was going to be going. So what Jerry is really arguing for is
Yes.
I get up here and I can't spell anymore. Okay.
You blew it, it's an eagle at the end.
Yeah.
Is it E?
And then,
I swear I can't spell. It's my daughter that was in the spelling bee the other day and not me. Okay. And we had goodness and truth here too, right?
Yes.
All right. So this is another thing. So, but this is an interesting question. Can you have a depiction, but as you said, an artistic depiction of evil, which is still sharing in transcendent beauty in a certain way?
Yes.
Yes, you can.
Okay, in a manner of speaking. So we have a lot of steps on the way from this transcendent beauty over to the experience. There's a lot of steps on the way which involve, first of all, what is the beautiful? What is the beautiful?
Yeah.
Take a look. Before, I'm going to pause right here. Let's take a look at some of our quotes. You had on number 3, if you hadn't read it yet, take a look at this. This is Plato.
Oh, wait, oh, in today's handout?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. In today's handout, sorry, I've got two packets of quotes here. So what's this process Plato is describing here, or rather the character in one of his dialogues is describing here? That there are beautiful things by which we can arrive at the beautiful itself. Now to Plato, this was the form of beauty, which resided somewhere in metaphysical space, this ultimate form. But if we compare that with, I'm sorry, with your turning back and forth between packets here, stop me if I'm going too fast. In the other packet, number 13, we have a quote from Pope Benedict XVI. And at the end of the first paragraph, where he says, "The truest beauty is the love of God." Truest beauty is the love of God, who definitively reveals himself to us in the Paschal mystery. And then in the next paragraph, he says, "Beauty is an essential element of the liturgical action," which we'll get to in a few minutes, "since it is an attribute of God himself and his revelation." So, the beautiful God, or the love of God, which is God. So, the beautiful. How does it get to here? First, with creation, right? Okay, and then for us, we're talking about music or the fine arts, as the case may be. Art, which is kind of a share in this creation, right? It's a way that we can further reveal the beautiful. Is this manipulation of creation in a way that that further reveals the love of God.
That's an old definition of art, that's not a current one for sure.
Well, there are a lot of definitions of art. What I'm really talking about is simply the process of getting from the love of God, from God himself, to an experience of beauty, and specifically in terms of art. And if we simply take it chronologically, we have these, right? But we have all along here human persons with their own will and their own intellect and their own experiences, all of which factor into that, right? All of which factor into that experience. So, beauty, then, we can talk about on multiple levels, right? We can talk about the experience of beauty. We can talk about the beauty in the thing itself. And we can talk about beauty, absolutely. Beauty, full stop. Okay? And any more discussions on that? I have one more thing to say, to point out on beauty, which is on the back of your quotes, the quotes from last week packet. What we're looking at is the middle of a quote from St. Augustine in the Confessions, where he's searching for God in creation, and he is going from one thing to the next, and they're all saying to him, "I am not God." But then he says, "My questioning was my attentive spirit, and their reply, their beauty." So right after they say to him, "He made us." So two parts of that. My questioning was my attentive spirit. So he played a part in that. It wasn't just creation imposing itself on him or something from the outside, imposing itself on him to make him get this idea or this experience. But he had a disposition, his attentive spirit, looking for God. So perhaps for us too, we can be more disposed to beauty if we have that attentive spirit. And that will bring us to the next thing. I might have some more things on beauty depending on time later, but since we're talking about sacred music, I should probably get to the liturgy. Do you remember from either session 1 or session 2, for those who were here, I had a quote from, actually it may be in your quotes here, from Pope St. Pius X, and he talks about the twofold scope of the liturgy. What were those two things that he called the scope of the liturgy? And if we look to, let's see, I'm looking now in your packet for today at number 4. because it hints as this as well. Sarah?
The glory of God and the edification and sanctification of the church.
Okay, all right. So, glory of God. So this is what he said. This is what Ophice said. We have these two. This is the scope of the liturgy, which sacred music shares in. The glory of God, the sanctification. He said sanctification and edification. Later documents that quoted him just kept saying sanctification, probably because they figured, well, edification is probably included in sanctification of the faithful. In this quote you have on page 4, it's describing this too. This is from the Catechism. In the liturgy, we bless the Father for his inexpressible gift in church, the church's adoration, praise, and thanksgiving. But then also we have this aspect of begging him to send the Holy Spirit upon that offering, upon herself, upon the church, upon the faithful, and upon the whole world. So those are the two wings, all right, the two aspects here: the glory of God, the sanctification of the faithful. Now, another thing I want you to take a look at is in your, let's see, okay, take a look in your packet from today, page 5, number 5. So the liturgy, who does the work of the liturgy?
What will?
The people.
Let's take a look here. So, Cardinal Ratzinger, some have lost sight of what is distinctive to the liturgy, which does not come from what we do, but from the fact that something is taking place here that all of us together cannot make. So, where is this coming from? This thing we call liturgy, that we participate in, that is apparently not something we make. God, okay. Keep going. What about? What are we celebrating?
Crucifixion, death, and resurrection.
All right, the Paschal Mystery. And it's the glory of heaven. That's what it is. It is whether or not we are doing the liturgy, this is the reality. And the liturgy is our opportunity to participate in that. So that's in that quote from the Catechism. In Christian tradition, the word liturgy means the participation of the people of God in the work of God. It's a change of the word liturgy. The Christian, the church really changed that word around. Initially, historically, before the Catholic Church, it meant work. It meant a public work of the people. In its sanctified version in the church, it is the work of God in which we participate. So let's talk then about how we approach the liturgy. I want to look at 2 quotes here in the other packet. Thank you for bearing with me. I should have just made a new one with everything in it. At number 11 and number 12. So, attentive Dom Delot, who is if you remember from previous sessions, we talked about Salem, the monastery of Salem, which we'll talk about more a bit next week. He was an abbot of Salem. Be attentive to the thought of the psalmist and of the church. And it's a theme throughout the Christian tradition to take our dispositions from the liturgy itself. Okay? And so, let's see, what else here? What was I going to go with next? Okay, in the next quote from the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy in Vatican II, it is necessary, in order that the liturgy may be able to produce its full effects, it is necessary that the faithful come to it with proper dispositions, that their minds should be attuned to their voices, and they should cooperate with divine grace, lest they receive it in vain. So, any thoughts about that so far? Looking at our twofold thing here, the next thing is going to be, read on that quote we were on at the last paragraph, sacred music is to be considered the more holy in proportion as it is more closely connected with the liturgical action, whether it adds delight to prayer, fosters unity of minds, or confers greater solemnity upon the sacred rite. So here, let's see if we can mix our reflections on music, on beauty, and the experience of the liturgy. So what can you come up with from what we were talking about, the creation of beauty, about the experience of beauty, about the experience of music, the effect it can have on you, the effect it should have on you, about our dispositions? Where does any of that fit in to any of this? Sarah?
I think about, in the point of being a cantor at Mass, that you need to know how the psalm response and the gospel acclamation fit in with the readings of the gospel, or the readings. And you have to become a part of that music that you're trying to present so that people can absorb it.
Okay.
So you're, essentially, this is Sister Catherine Harmon's words, you become the psalm as a cantor. Okay,
all right. So entering into the spirit of the text itself,
Yes.
all right, as a primary goal musically. Would you say that what I really want to talk about is the music and the beauty? So if we're talking about that musically, how would you relate that to, or how would anybody relate that to the music?
To glorify God.
Okay, to glorify God. How?
Because if the lyrics, I mean, if like what he's saying is like the Psalms, whatever the reading said is, it's for, we're reading his words. So it's like, we are giving back to him what he's giving to us.
Okay.
For glory.
All right, good. So you have two parts of that, which there are two. You came down both lines here. We have what in basically entering into the spirit of the text, the text of the Mass, which we receive, right? And what is that text primarily? Where does it come from?
From him. I mean, from the
Bible.
From the Bible, right? From the Bible, from the Word of God, God's revelation to us. We could say logos, right? Which is this word that the church has used for to refer to the Word of God being Christ, and the Word of God being His revelation, God's self-revelation. We go back to our beauty diagram down here. right? And we had the arrow going out of that, God's revelation of himself. That's another aspect of it, okay? So we have this entering into the spirit of the words, both for our own sanctification and because it glorifies God. We are taking a part in that revelation. Okay, now what about the experience of music? Okay, all of the different aspects we talked about. We had 3 things up here. We had emotional, psychological, spiritual. How do those fit in here, or do they? Does any of that matter for the glory of God or for the sanctification of the faithful?
I think so. Because like for me, like if like all of us are singing, we're praising God. I feel all the, those.
Okay,
things.
you feel joy in the unity. Okay. And that's one of the things right in our quote, right? Let's see. Where's that?
Number 12.
That was number 12. Right, that's right. Adds delight to prayer, fosters unity of minds, or confers greater solemnity upon the sacred rites. Okay. What else? Should the music make you feel a certain way?
Yes.
Or is a presenter of it or is a receptor?
Either or both.
The presenter is not a presenter of music. In essence, the music is the vehicle that he tries to convey the word of God.
Okay.
And
All right. I guess another question. Let me think of a couple of different ways. Yes, Sarah.
I'm gonna say no, that it does not require an emotional response from,
Okay. So.
because what I'm reading in the 2 quotes that you directed us toward is the duty or the, if we're talking about participation in liturgy, and I know you said you're gonna talk about that more, to come in, for a person not, to come in with a mind and a soul and everything prepared to take in the word of God and to worship God. And it says that then and only then, and to live your life that way as well, then and only then will the liturgy attain its twofold end. So I personally, and I have some pretty severe opinions about emotion in music, I don't really see where my emotions factor into that, but that might not be a very popular opinion.
Well, so there's 2. Right. That's good. There are 2 sides to that. One is what the question I asked, which was, should we aim to make music feel or have the music make us feel a certain way? There's another aspect of that is we as living, breathing human persons have emotions, and we come into the liturgy with that. Should we, from that experience, from that side of it, not from the creation of the music side, but from the experience of its side, what expectation do we have? Do we have any expectation on what music should do to us?
Yes.
Or is that, okay, in what respect?
Looking at the fact that it's in line with the liturgy, and that the music is supposed to help. It's a form of praying. So, in other words, it's supposed to help uplift the spirit, because people come to church to pray and to lift up the spirit. So the music is designed to help them uplift their spirit, uplift their worries towards the liturgy, so they could be part and parcel of the liturgy.
Okay, all right, now let's talk about, let me ask you, let's go back to beauty for a second. If you can think about an experience or a few experiences of beauty, of sublime beauty. What, let's see, there's a philosopher, Rudolf Otto, who called it the numinous experience. That the numen is this something transcendent, that's fascinating, indescribable, that's beyond reality, where you had an experience of beauty that drew you past that, something that you just couldn't describe. Now, is there a place in the liturgy for that?
Yes.
Obviously,
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
I mean, God is beyond description.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Are you talking about like,
now, is that
purpose
something?
for our work, our work in the liturgy? Is that what you're getting at?
Well, that's my next question is that something that can be manufactured?
Should be.
Maybe manufactured is the greatest word, but can I, as a music director creating the music, is there a formula for me to make sure that everybody who comes to church has that experience? No, right, no, okay.
I also can't really manufacture my own emotions. Like I might have, two different Sundays. I might feel joyful on one Sunday and not joyful because
Right.
of what's going on in my life. But I'm still going there for not for that joyful feeling, but for the other reasons.
So here's what I would.
The goal of liturgy is not to make us feel good at the moment necessarily, but it's to bring us to a certain spiritual, hopefully, raise us spiritually.
And again, relating to our own dispositions, like we were talking about before. So this is how I see the purpose of the choir and music generally in a parish. I see our primary duty is singing the Mass, okay? The Mass as we received it. Now the way, I said that a particular way, singing the Mass, not just singing songs at Mass, right? So we receive it and we enter into what we received. We present and we sing what we have received. The other thing we do is create these occasions of beauty. That's what when we work blood, sweat, and tears in the choir in this room on Thursday nights, rehearsing the same half a measure over and over again to get the vowels perfectly, that goes back into that whole music and mathematics, and there's some sort of order that strikes us about that, and create these occasions. But we can't, like we're saying, I can't make it happen for anybody, right?
It's not a formula.
Right, it's not a formula.
You cannot promise everybody it's going to be the same for everybody.
Now, when Nick was talking about just the different emotions that you might have coming into the liturgy, I think this is something for me that I reflect on too. Like, there are times that maybe, you go all Sunday morning, you've been yelling at the kids, and the psalm is, children are a heritage from the Lord. Or maybe you're struggling with some habitual sin, and the responsorial psalm is, Lord, I love your commands, right? So, but are you going to sit there in the pew and say, no, I don't love God's commands. I really don't like them right now, so I'm not going to sing. And this is where we can be drawn up into something that is beyond anything we can make, like that quote from Cardinal Ratzinger. There is something taking place here that all of us together cannot make. And when we, as a church, enter into that, then that brings about these things. We glorify God, and we are sanctified through the Paschal mystery that we participate in. And it requires that attention, that attentive spirit that Augustine referred to that disposition to prayer, that kind of interior silence where we can listen. And that brings me to number 8 in today's packet. And I'll just let you take a minute to read through those. Ultimately, I see I really focus on those two aspects of what I said are the job of the choir, or the job of church musicians. One belongs to the virtue of religion. The virtue of religion is part of justice. It's giving God his due. And that is where we take the liturgy that we have received and we sing the liturgy, to add the solemnity to it, to add the sacredness to it. And the other part is, you know what, I'm going to state it differently. I'll say the other part, which is not exclusive to the liturgy, but is in the liturgy subservient to this. And that is an apostolate of beauty, where through art we can provide, hopefully, to those who are disposed, these occasions to experience that mystery in a way that draws us out of just our everyday world. And this is why we do things differently. This is why we do music differently in the liturgy. We approach it from a completely different direction, drawing out of the liturgy itself, directing it towards God, and not catering to our own preferences, our own feelings, our own desires. All of that, when we walk through that door of the church, we are the church, and we worship as the church. So I guess I'll end with that. And do we have any other questions on all of this, on experience of music in the liturgy, on beauty? Now, none of what I've done here is particularly scientifically rigorous, so I appreciate challenges to it as well, to test it. Yes?
I just want to clarify, since I wasn't here for previous sessions. So are we speaking like universally, like, throughout the entire globe, almost the way like if Latin were the one language of the mass, it kind of transcends cultures? Because, like in Africa, let's say, music is cultural. And then, like, what do you say, even in America, you have the gospel music, and so it's like brings in a lot of other factors. So when we're talking about sacred music, we're talking about can you just speak a little bit more about that in terms of cultural differences and universality?
Yes, I will. I will talk about that a lot more next week.
Okay.
That will be that will be going into that will be part of next week's discussion.
Okay.
But generally speaking, yes. So both of those, you mentioned two things. One is the difference of cultures, and two is the universality of the liturgy and the universality of that experience. One of the reasons we do use Latin in the Western Church is for that universality. It's not any particular culture's language anymore. It's not now, but so in that respect, it's ours as Catholics even more, because that Catholic identity is even stronger, should be even stronger than any other identity we have. So, but at the same time, going back to the love of God and creation and art, as it has taken expression in cultures across the world. This is why the church is so hesitant to say for sure, yes, you can have this kind, no, you can't have this kind, is because there is a genius, particular genius to each culture, which shares in that beauty of creation, and to the extent that can go along with everything else we were talking about, there is certainly a place for it in the liturgy. But as we'll see when we look a little bit more into Vatican II later, always it has to follow in that, right? So it can't be just a celebration of culture, right? It's being put to a higher purpose. So, for more next week, yes.
And in the past, not from you obviously, but from like a previous choir director, my understanding for the purpose of the music team, the choir and the cantor and all, was to aid the congregation in participating in singing as well.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that fit in with the two things up there for you?
I think it fits in both. I see, because if we look at the liturgy itself, it's divided up into, I don't want to use the word divided up, but everybody who is there, depending on who we are in the liturgy, has a role to play. There is, of course, a unique role for the priest and the deacon. There is a part for the congregation. There's a part for the choir. So the congregation, the choir is, in a sense, a part of the congregation, right? There used to be clerical choirs, but no, we're not clerical choirs. We're part of the congregation, but there is still a unique role for the choir itself. So to the extent that we are part of the congregation, yes, that's correct. We do, of course, hope to aid congregational participation. And I use the word participation more broadly because it's more than just singing, and it goes into our apostolate of beauty as well, right? Anything else?
So John,
Yes.
in a sense that when we sing the liturgy, or we as a choir, our intention is like to give praise, and at the same time, when you talk about feeling and emotion and stuff. So like for example, Sarah is singing, I can feel what she's singing when she's singing like beautifully, right? So what I'm thinking is like as choir, when we're singing, we should have that feeling as well when they hear us sing, that we are praising God, they feel the same way. That's what I was thinking.
That's right. Yes. So that is that's an important thing about the about the disposition of us as musicians too, because especially for those of us who are professional musicians, there's, and I imagine for others as well, there's always a temptation to want to be the one to whom the glory is attributed. And so that is always a struggle as well in terms of the music choice, where it happens in the liturgy. I'll talk a little bit more about my logic for that next week. But that's right. That for the choir, that is ideally the yes. In fact, I had a quote. I had a technical difficulty and I couldn't put my. I did have one PowerPoint slide, which is just one quote, and it said, let's see, the beauty of the choir is, it said something like, the beauty of the choir is more in its holiness than in its perfect art per se. And that's, I don't quite have it right. That was from I remember we're talking about Salem again. Salem had had also a group of sisters, and Mother Abbess Cecilia Bruyere, who was a mother abbess of those sisters, those Benedictine sisters. That was a quote from her. But that's something that's important from the choir perspective too, and for me too, to think about when I'm driving the choir with a whip here on Thursday nights. Am I aiding in your sanctification, or am I creating anxiety? And hopefully not the latter too much. But it's always a balance. Anything else?
Well, speaking of balance and kind of following on a previous question, it seems like there can be a tension between making it more accessible for the congregation to sing, maybe singing things that are easier for them to sing, they're more familiar with, and challenging them with more things that are also beautiful and maybe would bring them closer to God, like maybe chant, for instance, is what I'm thinking of. Obviously, there's been a lot of chant lately in church, and do you see a tension between those two things at all?
Tell me the two things again.
One would be first would be making it easier or more accessible for the congregation to join in the singing and singing things that they're familiar with, that makes them maybe bring some emotional response to them, perhaps, but also makes it more participatory. And then there's also like the driving, maybe pushing towards a vision of chant, perhaps, is an example, because that's what we're doing a lot of right now, which makes it more focused on the text of the church, the liturgical nature of the church, maybe bringing the congregation along to a certain extent over time.
So the answer is yes. It is a difficult balance. It's always kind of feeling it out, and part of that is things like this, and hopefully other things I can do too, because let's see, there was another quote. Oh, you know what? Let's see. Why did I bring my big binder? No, I didn't. I think I wrote down the quote though. Okay, so in Pope John Paul II wrote an apostolic letter called Spiritus et Sponsus. It was and it begins with a quote from Revelation, which is Spiritus et Sponsus, the Spirit and the Bride. The Spirit and the Bride say, "Come," and let him who hears say, "Come," and let him who is thirsty come. Let him who desires take the water of life without price. From chapter 22, verse 17 in Revelation. So the first thing I would say is that this is an invitation, and that the other side of that is what Pope John Paul II says in that letter, which is, liturgy presupposes the proclamation of the gospel and demands a Christian witness in history. the mystery proposed in preaching and catechesis, listened to with faith, and celebrated in the liturgy, must shape the entire life of believers who are called to be its heralds to the world. So, the Mass is, it presupposes preaching and catechesis. So it presupposes a whole spiritual life of the parish. And a lot of churches, the reason I emphasize this is a lot of churches use the Mass as a tool for evangelization. And that's not what it's for. It presupposes that that work is done. And here's the invitation to come higher, you know, as in that one parable when Christ calls us higher at the table, to come higher to the table. So, but yes, in practical terms, again, there's no perfect formula to that. But I do. That's primarily how I look at it, is an invitation, and take these other opportunities with education in the parish to prepare people for that, and to help people approach with the disposition where they can take some of that initiative on their own too. So I can only invite so much, and then it's always it's difficult to determine, okay, what's the next step to take? Is it time to take the next step? When I look around at some masses, or in some parts of the church, as it seems to be, and nobody seems to be participating externally, it doesn't necessarily tell me anything. I can't go interview everybody. The priests have a much better pulse on the spiritual life of the parish than I do, and that's mostly through confessions and counseling. So I rely largely on them to help me. Mainly, they hold me back. There are times when we hold each other back, but it's the short answer is yes. That was a very long answer.
On congregation participation, I just want to say, and it's a compliment, I mentioned this to you once before, but there was that one Mass where after communion you sang the litany. I don't know if you recall that. No preparation of the congregation, nothing, and it was as much response and participation in that as in anything that's been sung in a long time. People just spontaneously, picked up with the pray for us.
Yeah, that must have been All Saints Day, I think it was. Thank you. All right, thank you. So next week we will be looking at the modern liturgical reform. We'll be talking about, there's a question about Latin. We'll be talking about Latin. What place should that take in the liturgy? And I've talked a lot about chant and the importance of chant, primacy of chant. And so we could talk about more the place of all non-chant music. Where does that fit in? Mainly under this category, right? And then I'll talk to you about my process for selecting music. So, thank you. After this session, I realized there were several things I did not cover as thoroughly or precisely as I had intended. So I'm going to run through now a kind of summary of the main points of the session and include the material I missed. We began the discussion reminding ourselves of the fact that sacred music is significant because of how the melody, in the words of the Second Vatican Council, clings to the text. For more information on that, please see the video of the first session of the seminar. But then we turned to a discussion of what music itself is. I'm not going to go into detail right now about that, as it's not really to the point. More significant was our discussion of the different effects that music can have on persons, whether it served as a kind of catalyst for emotions, psychological states, or spiritual experiences. Most importantly, we saw that the effects of music on a particular person are highly dependent on that person's disposition. This is a very important point which bears on every aspect of this discussion, and I'm not sure that I made it with sufficient force throughout the session. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Discussion of the way music influences us on a spiritual plane took us into an investigation of beauty. Some people mentioned various notions of beauty, that it is according to the classic maxim, in the eye of the beholder, or that it resides in particular characteristics of the thing itself, to a greater or lesser extent, the thing that is that we're calling beautiful, or that it brings with it a certain type of experience. A key concept to understand here is that beauty, as I use the term, is not simply equated with something that gives me pleasure, nor is it, as some philosophers have stated, simply conformity to a more or less arbitrary standard of structure or form. Instead, we said beauty, or quote-unquote, the beautiful, with a capital B, seems to be something transcendent, such that whatever is truly beautiful in the world, such as a piece of music or art, or a landscape or a person, in part shares in something that is ultimately perfect and indescribable. But once again, it seems that certain people may or may not be able to identify or appreciate something that is truly beautiful, to some degree, again, based on their disposition. An important conclusion to this discussion is that something can be truly beautiful, although some or even many people do not immediately recognize it as such, though with some personal investment, they may be able to do so later. For instance, you might find classical music incredibly boring as a child, but perhaps a music appreciation course in college enables you to discover beauty in the works of composers such as Bach, Mozart, or Rachmaninoff, beauty to which, due to previous ignorance and lack of effort, you were previously blind. Now, we have been speaking a little bit loosely with respect to beauty because we should really distinguish between beauty itself as a transcendent and our experience of beauty, which always happens through things in the world. Every experience of beauty has with it a few different parts, and I think I was unsuccessful during the session in communicating this with the kind of path I drew on the whiteboard going from transcendent beauty to our experience. But the distinction I really want to emphasize is the distinction between the pleasure given by a beautiful thing, whether it be art or music or what have you, and the actual knowledge of its beauty. And by that I mean the fact that it points to something beyond itself, something eternal and perfect and lovely and good. Remember, we had said that what makes it beautiful is that it points beyond itself. And this means that the logical follow-up to an experience of beauty is not to focus on the pleasure, not to focus on our reaction, not to focus just on what it does to us, but rather on the ultimately indescribable eternal reality. And that would be a kind of contemplation, just resting the gaze of one's heart and mind on goodness itself, which is God. And sometimes this might provide the impetus to, say, praise God, or to pray for someone, or to feel compunction and beg forgiveness of God, all of which could bring with them another set of emotional or psychological phenomena. All of this is good. I would contend, however, that often we misidentify the physiology as the good to be sought, so that we seek after either the pleasure of enjoying the thing, whatever it was, or seek after the feeling of praise, compunction, etc. on the posterior side. But we should remember that the essence of what we recognized as beauty was not the feelings, whether prior or posterior, but the fact that we were drawn to something beyond mere physical or physiological experiencing. In other words, although emotional pleasure might often co-occur with an experience of beauty, it doesn't have to. And again, this is where we return to discussion of our personal disposition. If we seek to feel pleasure, to feel joy, to feel compunction, to have experiences that do something to us, then all we're doing is seeking experiences that manipulate our emotions. But if we begin by purely seeking goodness itself for its own sake and expecting no reward, we will find beauty in places we never thought we could, regardless of any particular feelings that may or may not come. Now let's return to the central idea of this session, which is beauty in the liturgy. In the discussion, we recalled the twofold scope of the liturgy as articulated by Pope St. Pius X, the glory of God and the sanctification of the faithful. The liturgy is a celebration of the Paschal mystery and is, according to the Catechism, not our work, but, quote, the participation of the people of God in the work of God, unquote. Now this means that the mystery of the liturgy is something infinitely beyond our comprehension. As then Cardinal Ratzinger said, quote, some have lost sight of what is distinctive to the liturgy, which does not come from what we do, but from the fact that something is taking place here that all of us together cannot make, unquote. This otherworldliness is something that should inform how we do the liturgy. We are participating in an everlasting heavenly banquet, and so we have rites, art, music, language, and even clothing that is unlike what we find around us in our everyday secular life. We also looked at another quote from Vatican II about sacred music and the importance of its connection to the liturgical action, quote, whether it adds delight to prayer, fosters unity of minds, or confers greater solemnity upon the sacred rites, unquote. From this I explained that I believe that liturgical musicians have two main purposes. The primary purpose is to sing the Mass, adding solemnity to the sacred liturgy, which we, the Church, have received through the guidance of the Holy Spirit. The secondary purpose, which is, however, subordinate to the first and works in conjunction with it, is to provide occasions of beauty. One of the best arguments for this, I think, is from Pope Benedict XVI. Quote, the truest beauty is the love of God, who definitively revealed himself to us in the Paschal mystery. The beauty of the liturgy is part of this mystery. It is a sublime expression of God's glory and, in a certain sense, a glimpse of heaven on earth. Beauty, then, is not mere decoration, but rather an essential element of the liturgical action, since it is an attribute of God himself and his revelation. These considerations should make us realize the care which is needed if the liturgical action is to reflect its innate splendor. Consequently, everything ought to correspond to the meaning of the mystery being celebrated. Now, this is where we can bring everything full circle to understand the theological place of music in the liturgy. The essential aspect of sacred music in the liturgy is that it is a kind of solemn proclamation of the sacred text. We use it because it sets liturgical text apart from everyday speech, making it holy. Also because it can foster and amplify unity among many voices. It can reflect some aspect of God by its beauty, which points to an ultimately indescribable truth. And finally, based on its potential to be a powerful force emotionally, it can invite us to take on, for ourselves, the sense of the liturgy celebrated by the whole Church, purifying our hearts, filling us with divine grace, and drawing us beyond our physical sense existence into contemplation of the face of God himself. However, as Vatican II again tells us, quote, in order that the liturgy may be able to produce its full effects, it is necessary that the faithful come to it with proper dispositions, that their minds should be attuned to their voices, and that they should cooperate with divine grace, lest they receive it in vain, unquote. So the two sides of the coin are, on the one hand, liturgical artists who are tasked with devoted service to the liturgy and an apostolate of beauty, and the congregation, which, by the way, includes the choir, who must come to the liturgy adopting the appropriate disposition. In what exactly does that disposition consist? I'll be talking about that, along with many other things, in the fourth session. In that session, I will be discussing the modern liturgical reform and addressing questions I have been receiving about why the music is the way it is at St. Timothy's right now, and not some other way. Thank you for your attention, and God bless.